As there gets to be more pressure, there tends to be more conflict between some of the groups that are using the river. So like Jeff said, we're not trying to launch into like a problem solving effort of like, how do we solve all these problems? Because what we really think is sort of on a foundational level, if we want to do anything about the pressure and the conflicts around it, is that we need to understand the perspectives of other users of the river or other stakeholders. So we brought together a panel of speakers to sort of represent some of those different user groups or interest groups to hear their perspective on what the river means to them and their perspective on over the pressure and crowding on the river. So what we want to do is not figure out the answers and start implementing them, but really try to understand perspectives other than our own, with the idea being that if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to make any progress. We're not even going to really be able to get started. So we have a guide, a fishing guide, a business owner, a kayaker, a landowner who's also a waiter, and hopefully a DEC law enforcement person. And we're just going to ask each of them to talk a little bit and share their perspective on the river and on the issues. Again, hoping just to build a foundation of understanding. So what I would ask of all of you is when you're listening to really be curious about who is this person and why are they on the river and what is their experience and where are they coming from? Trying to really understand the person. And if you start feeling in your head like you're getting ready with your rebuttal, try to let that go and just be curious about how can I understand this person and their perspective. And then when we get to the end, we'll check in and we'll hopefully have time for some questions and some discussion. Sound good? All right, so our first panelist is Matt Ertzinger, who is a guide on the river. And Matt, welcome. You're still with us, right?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Matt had a little trouble with his phone, which maybe you can tell people.
Yeah, my phone took a drink in the river. I'm actually on the water working right now up in Pulaski. So unfortunately, my speaker is not working very well, but my microphone seems to be. So I apologize for that.
No worries. So Matt, could you start off just telling us a bit about yourself and what the Upper Delaware River means to you? You still there? Just anything about your guiding or like anything else you want us to know about you and what does a river mean to you?
Hey guys, this is Dan. Do you think there's any way that maybe
can you guys hear me?
Maybe Shell could text him the questions.
I got, hello?
Yeah, Matt.
Okay. Can you repeat that first part? I don't know.
Just if you could just introduce yourself, it would be great. Say a few words about yourself and what you do. And if you can, you could also tell us a little bit about what the river means to you, the Upper Delaware River. I think you might be muted.
I think he might have gotten cut off again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I think you were muted there.
I don't know what's going on. The phone's kind of going quirky because of the water.
We can hear you now.
Okay, so once again, my name is Matt Ertzinger. I'm a 7th year guide on the Delaware and on the Salmon River. I am a permanent New York guide. I don't travel anywhere else. I work inside the state and I'm on the water, about 250 days a year. I spend my spring and summer from April till September down on the Delaware. I fell in love with the Delaware River after I moved here from Oregon and never thought I would find another river I could be passionate about until I came upon the Delaware, and it really is my lifeline in New York. I really cherish the river very much.
All right, thanks. And so you're on the river, I can't remember the numbers you said, some close to 365 days of the year.
Well, 285 about is the ballpark.
Do you think fishing pressure is increasing and pressure on the river in general is increasing? And if so, what's the impact of that you see?
Yeah, so I definitely think there's more pressure. It seems to be season by season, I'm seeing it more. When I first started, it was that was kind of the litmus test. I didn't have anything to judge it off of, and now, after 7 years, I see it increase year after year, especially as Jeff noted. After COVID, people needed to get outside; they were looking for new things to do. Um, so I would say yes, especially the last couple years. Some examples that I notice when I'm on the water. We used to be able to pull in as a guide into a pool and a boat, maybe have a waiter or two, and maybe just another boat to compete with, as far as jockeying for spots or this tranquility that we're looking for. And now I'm seeing up to 40 boats in some pools in prime time. And it's a little discouraging as I make my living on the river. I love it. I'm passionate about it. And for me to skirt through a couple pools and can't get anywhere to fish is a little troublesome sometimes for me and for my guest on the river.
Yeah. And other than that frustration, which sounds like it's probably pretty big, what are some of the other impacts that you see of the increased pressure?
Yeah. So, well, I'll start off, that the experience is a little less enjoyable just because there are people. Now, I get that everyone wants to get out and fish and have fun, and I would never deny that right to anyone. But it's getting to the point where it can be a little frustrating, not only because I can't find a spot to put my guest on the water that day, but also I just feel really bad for the fish. I'm seeing a lot more elongated jaws. We used to say, oh, yeah, I caught a clean fish today. It looked like it's never been hooked. That's very difficult to say these days. It seems like, with the amount of pressure and the little amount of fish that, I think that I believe we have, that the pressure on the fish is greater with the crowds coming in.
Yeah.
Some of the other, let's see, some of the other things I might point out. It's just especially late summer. As the summer goes on, we have less and less water to fish. The guides are very, they take it into consideration, the water temps. Okay, we don't like to fish to the trout over 65 or 66 degrees. It puts too much strain on them, so that limits us to the West Branch and especially the Upper West late in the season. So not only do we have 120 miles to fish in the spring, which is great, but most people gravitate towards the West Branch because it tends to be the bug factory. And so that section, that branch has a lot of pressure from day one until, you know, day 120, day, 200, 260, however long the season goes, those fish have pressure every day.
Yeah. I know I said when we opened, this isn't a problem solving thing, but
Yep.
Since you're on the river so often, do you want to share any reflections on what you think some could be done, if anything?
Well, obviously catch and release is huge. We want to keep the fish that we have alive. If we have people taking fish, then the odds of the pressure goes up tenfold because there's one less fish and one more angler. So, a catch and release throughout the system would be amazing. We're in a wild trout fishery. Okay. That's pretty unique. There's not a lot of rivers that are 100% wild or close to 100% wild, reproduction. And we're fortunate enough to have that right underneath our noses. So the catch and release, I think, is very big. You know, maybe a regulatory approach needs to be thought about, something where we can spread anglers out in different sections instead of letting everyone go to the west when they think it's going to be a good day during May for Hendrickson's. Well, the whole system fishes well in May, and so to spread out the boats or maybe even fish off hours. People want those peak hatch hours and then go into the spinners. Me personally have found in the morning, I do just as well on the spinner fall, which is a life cycle of a bug. If we don't all know, it's a life cycle of the mayfly. It's the end of its life, when they're pretty much helpless and lifeless on the water, but the fish love them. And I have found spinner fishing to be very good in the morning. So I am also trying to spread out and not fish the peak hours. I think that's huge. visiting other waters. You know, we live in the birthplace of fly fishing in America. Okay, we have water all around us, but the one thing these guys want to target wild fish on top, you know, on dry flies. And we have those options in other rivers. The problem, once again, is water temps. We have to worry about the other pressure and maybe PFR having those accessible to us as guides or as just your, you know, your recreational angler.
Right.
You know, even getting out of the boat to wade. Sometimes there's too much boat traffic. So maybe actually doing some wade trips and mixing them in could be a great source of, you know, of an alternative source to get out and experience the river.
Nice. Thank you for
An
those.
increase of water flows to extend cold water down into Lordville throughout, you know, part of July and into late July. That would be awesome. That's another 10 miles, 12 miles of water, you know, with boat launch access all the way down. So that opens up a lot more just to have a little more cold water flushing into the system. Those would be my top, I guess, right off the top of my head. Those are my top.
That sounds great.
top answers.
Any final words? We're going to move on to our next person in just a sec.
No, I mean, I'm out. I'm not trying to solve any problems either. I'm just looking for, you know, a cooperative effort between the region to let everyone enjoy this. I'm looking forward to another 20 years of working 30 years on this river that I love, and I don't want it to go bye-bye and go to the wayside. And with the pressure we're getting, because the West isn't as fishable, there's hoot owl hours, and the fishing is waning off down there because of climate change or whatever you might call it. More and more anglers are going to be seeking out the tailwaters, and we are a tailwater. And I would expect pressure to increase over the next 10 years exponentially. I'm on the Salmon River right now with steelhead. There's no steelhead out west anymore. The guides folded up. I have a lot of friends that have folded their business. Guys are looking to catch steelhead, so they're coming to the Great Lakes. So I'm looking on both the rivers that I love and work on and make a living on. It's going to be tough for all of us. So that's kind of my point. I'm not looking for, you know, I'm looking for a solution, but a cooperative. You know, I don't have the answer. And I think this panel is exactly what we're looking for.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I mean,
Matt,
I'm sorry. And if people have questions for Matt, you can put them in the chat. We're not going to do questions after each speaker, but hopefully we'll have a little time at the end. So the next panelist we want to bring up is Mike Argyros, who is a local business owner in Hancock. He owns, and you can tell me if this is right, Mike, I think it is, the Upper Delaware Inn and Hancock Cinemas. Welcome, Mike. And if maybe you could start out just telling us a little bit about yourself and what the river means to you.
Sure, thanks, Clay. Well, the businesses, I could include my wife too, but we swapped out the Upper Delaware Inn for Smith's Colonial Motel. So we have the other motel on the river. The movie theater, the newspaper, and I do a bookkeeping business here in town. So that's the business aspect of it. I've lived here since 77 as a kid. My wife's been here year round. I'm also involved in the Hancock Partners and other local community, you know, chamber of commerce, that sort of thing. So I'll try to represent all those in my thoughts and what I'm going to present. But what does the river mean? Well, since you got me here as a business person, the river is probably one of the biggest assets to help the economy here, is what it means. I mean, the Hancock Partners back in 2004, we were trying to, the mission was to say, hey, somebody coined Hancock at the time as a sad little town, and the Hancock Partners, what can we do to help turn that around? And when you look at some of the signs, welcome to Hancock, we dubbed, like other towns further downstream, we identified ourselves as gateway to the Upper Delaware because we recognize the river as being a focal point or an asset. And to that extent, tourism has been every small town is trying to find some reason to promote tourism, whether it's, you're the hometown of the guy who invented the zipper to, in our case, the Bat Factory and Honest Eddie, the, baseball, as well as the fact that we have the river here. So in some aspect, the efforts to increase tourism, it feeds the problem. It's that you guys are trying to solve here, that we're trying to solve, and I don't mean, and I mean it to be a we. So what does the river mean? Well, I'll say this aspect. When I bought the motels, the first one, and then I traded it or sold it and got the second one, fishermen were the largest single clientele group, single group that we were targeting. Probably represents 25% of our motel business. Summer camps are small, but behind that, and then it's the year-round vacationers. Vacationing and just general tourism, particularly with COVID, has increased over a much longer part of the year. So I think COVID has, as the other gentleman, Matt, said, the COVID issue has dramatically increased the length of time that people are coming up and staying for weekends. So why do they come here when they're trying to get out of the city? Well, they're coming here to get out of the city because there's something to do. There's some hiking, but there's fishing, there's the river, there's nature, and relatively less people from what they're used to. On the other hand, and Clay, you were with us at the meeting January 2020, there's other people that have been up here over the last 10, 15, 20 years that have noticed the increase. Their perspective is, we came up here to get rid of the crowds, and now we have potential traffic jams in our small little town, which we never had before. So I just offer those thoughts as validating that the business world and the residential community here also are seeing the increase in people. And
if I can ask, what does that mean to you as a business person, like that more and more people are coming?
Well, if the people are coming and they're buying from local businesses, and they're eating at restaurants, staying at hotels, frequenting the shops that are, there must be some of that going on. I think it means a good thing for me, from my point of view, because we're trying to make the town lively and vibrant and active, so that it's a place where people might want to live. Ultimately, it would be great if someone said, okay, I think I'm going to move my business up here, maybe bring my family, so there's a few more kids in the school. So anything that improves the quality of life in the area, that helps keep it on the positive side of some tipping point that exists, so it's growing rather than deteriorating, wherever that tipping point is. That's what I think the increased population allows for. It provides hope that maybe things are going to progress in a healthier direction.
Are there
I don't
any dangers?
Go ahead.
Are there any dangers to that?
Well, there are, because the whatever environment or culture you're trying to protect by increasing by like I said, if the margin is really narrow, then you hit that tipping point, and then you've suddenly thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Now we all want to live in this small town. My wife and I have decided that this is where we're going to retire. So we bought the other motel as our retirement plan. If all of a sudden, I don't even know what to compare it to, but if all of a sudden the environment has changed to such a degree that it really is just a transient population of tourism, rather than having that small town feeling where you can say hi to the guy down the street and get to meet a few new people every year and every season, and well, now you've thrown it out. The very thing you're trying to create by having increased economic activity, you've wasted. So I don't know what the balance is, and I don't know what the answers are either. But I do know that, as has been said here, we need to work together to find that balance, because I recognize that the importance of the serenity right on the river. The gentleman before said, you know, all of a sudden now you have, I'm worried about traffic jams, as I said, when we've talked in the past, Clay, on my street corner down here on West End of Hancock. And then, but I see it as I cross the bridge into Pennsylvania every day, that all of a sudden where it used to be, you'd see one or two, and I found this very appealing to me. The peace and serenity. I'm going home and I look and it's sunset, or maybe I'm coming to work and it's sunrise, and there's one or two guys on a foggy river casting their lines, wading in the water. And just the sight of it is appealing to myself, and to many of my circle of friends. Where all of a sudden now you look and there's 2 drift boats, 4 fishermen, and 8 fluorescent kayaks, all within view from the Pennsylvania, you know, the bridge that crosses into Pennsylvania, looking at that last little piece of the West Branch before it hits the main stem of the river. And you think, wow, that's a traffic jam right there on the water. So again, whether it's regulation or whatever, but I wouldn't want to, I think it's important, because if there's no town here with services, one of the things is that, wearing my Hancock Partners hat, we've been trying to address is getting some of the restaurants and food service providers to be more accommodating. You know, you guys get off the river. I see whichever part of this group on my screen is fishermen. They get off the river at 9:30 and there's nobody open, you know, except for Lydia. You know, across town maybe is open. So where do they you know, get some food, or are there services to provide for the fishing community? So that's one of the things that we're looking to help address, and by having conversations, because the fishermen are important to the economy, very important to the economy here. So, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want to chase out the family who's vacationing up here. That's how I ended up here. My parents came up to vacation. My father was running a restaurant in the city. My mother said, Tony, figure it out, but we're not going back to Brooklyn. Right.
Thank you,
And
Mike.
what was it she saw? So that was good for the school. It was good for the community. My father, left the restaurant business, started a small construction business at the time. That's what Hancock could ultimately benefit from. And from my vantage point, I would want to support and encourage anything that might lead to more of that without people looking at an overcrowded place.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. That's really helpful to hear. And again, if you have questions for Mike, you can put them in the chat and we'll come back at the end if we have a few minutes. Next up is our local kayaker, Jess Stanton. Welcome, Jess. And maybe you could start off with the same question. If you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and what the river means to you.
Hi, I've lived here my entire life. I live very close to the river, right on the PA border. The river has always been a place to gather thoughts, find peace. It's a happy place to be. You get back to your life. You get back to reality on the river. It heals all.
That's great. And as a kayaker, do you see more people coming to spend time on the river? And how does that affect you? What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. Like everybody said, you know, since COVID, it gets crazy on the river. In the early spring, it's very packed on the river. Like like I said earlier, we went early April this year from the PA Bridge down to Buckingham, and there was not a time we didn't see at least 3 drift boats. It makes you know, everybody's day difficult, but you know, everybody wants to enjoy the river.
Mm-hmm. And do you experience a lot of conflicts with anglers and boats as a kayaker, or do you see a lot of that, and how do you understand it?
I don't personally, but I have outside relationships with a lot of the guides. I work at the Bat Factory, so I know a lot of them. I see them before they go on the river. I make them their food. We talk to them well, you know, as we pass. We use respect, try not to paddle too hard when you're going past to irritate the fish. You know, if we can't tell which direction they're casting, or whatever you call it when you're whipping flies, we'll yell. Casting. Wasn't sure if it was still casting. We'll yell ahead, you know, to see which direction they're casting, so we can go, you know, the opposite direction if possible.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have a decent relationship with anglers on the water, partly because you know them. And how do you account for the fact that that people do talk about so much conflict between like kayakers or paddle boarders or other boaters and anglers?
The not knowing, I think, like I said, growing up here, like my father has always fished. My son fishes. If you come to go kayaking, you don't, by some strange, you live under a rock or something, you don't realize it's the greatest trout fishing in America here on the Delaware. You don't realize you're going to run into all these fishermen, and you head down the river in a kayak and you have no clue what to do.
Hmm.
And that causes a lot of animosity between the trout fishermen and recreational use,
Mhm.
the lack of knowledge.
Yeah, from people who don't have so much experience and sort of
Yeah, they're
know
not
the timeline.
understanding how the other person is, what the other person is actually trying to do.
Mhm. That makes sense. And do you have any thoughts on what would help the situation?
No, people are going to do what people want to do.
We thought you were going to solve the problem for us.
No. I can make the days easier on the river. I just can't solve the problems.
And what is it that makes the days easier on the river?
Floating the way we float.
Yeah, it sounds like with some knowledge of how to interact with other people on the river.
I think it's also just how to interact with other people in general.
How do you mean?
Some people don't have that capacity, I think. I've worked with the public pretty much my whole life. If you can't, everybody has bad days, but if you can't smile and be courteous to one another, then you're going to make someone's day shit.
Yeah.
Happens on the river too.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about the pressure on the river and how it affects you, or what you see, what you hope for in the future?
It would be nice to have, certain times and places where you can go and just do your thing, but we all have a right to share that river.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just going to have to be a lot of common courtesy and people looking the other way, not getting angry just because things aren't going your way.
Nice. Thank you for those wise words.
You're welcome.
All right, let us move on to our next panelist, who, let me make sure I'm going in the right order here, who is a landowner and a waiter, Glenn Erickson. Glenn, welcome. Could you start off telling us a little bit about yourself and what the river means to you?
Yeah, so I am an angler. I've had my wife and I have owned our house on the river for almost 20 years. I do like to wade fish, do a lot more of that than fishing out of a boat. My wife's also a kayaker, and she likes to, read down by the river, and she likes to go swimming, and just sun herself by the river. It's our backyard, and it's where we like to hang out when we can. And kind of like Jessica, to me, it's my temple. I mean, it's just how I relax and how I deal with everything else that's going on with life and regenerate and everything. So it means a lot to us. And, we love that you can see the river behind me. This is our section of river behind the house. And, we used to live in New York City, and to come up from the city and be up here was just like being in heaven. So yeah, we love it.
Great. And what are some of your main concerns as a landowner about how the river's used?
Well, I think the thing that happened to us, and I think the reason you asked me to participate, is in fact, it had gotten a lot more use over the years. There used to be a public access. It was about a mile downstream of us. In fact, it was across from Dan Plummer's place. And so he had to deal with a lot of the anglers that were coming in and going in the river, maybe crossing over to his property. That access point got moved up, and it got moved up about the same time that we did a trout habitat improvement project, putting a bunch of boulders and tried to make a nicer looking river, and also one that had a better habitat for trout, which, you know, seems to have worked pretty well. And so once those two things happened, whereas we hardly ever saw anybody before that come up on the river, after that, we started seeing a lot more activity. And you know, some of it good, but certainly not all of it good. You know, I certainly made some friends out of some of the people who came up, which is a great thing. But by the same token, we had people who came up and left trash. You know, we got poop and we got toilet paper on our rear lawn. We got, you know, I had guys who would stand on the bank on my property, you know, 5-10 feet away from the river and tell me that this was, you know, public land and that I didn't have any right to do anything on it. And I had to send in a DEC officer to chase the guy out. I mean, it's just crazy things that would happen. And it got to the point where my wife just wouldn't, you know, she didn't want to come down if she saw anglers down there, particularly if they were on the bank. So people that she didn't know. If she knew them, if they were in the water, you know, that would be fine. But, you know, I want her to want to come up to the place with me. And so that became kind of an issue for me. So at that point, we started posting. And the posting, you know, it's been gone through a few iterations, but I think the posting has worked. And I, you know, still get some anglers who come up, but for the most part, they're friendly and they don't leave things behind and they're much more respectful. And it strikes me that lower numbers is better for the river, is better for the trout. You know, and it's a difficult thing to say because, you know, I fish a lot of public water. I go out west, I go up to Canada, you know, Labrador, a lot of places. Some places are private water, some places it's public. But you want to have places where people can get out and fish and particularly find, I feel, the solitude and the beauty of being in nature and really being able to enjoy so much of what this type of country provides us. And you want people to have that. So I don't have more solutions than anybody else. It's a difficult thing. It's no question.
Can I ask you, like, what do you do when you are waiting around private land that's not yours? I know you mentioned one sort of anecdote of something that you.
Oh, well, one of the things I've done for years here on the East Branch is, you know, there's a lot of farmers that own and control property and other people as well. And so, you know, I would go up in the beginning of the season and give a farmer, walk up to his door, give him a bottle of wine, ask him if it's okay if I come by and fish a few times, you know, in the year. And I find that people really like that. I know it's hard to believe, but people really like that personal contact, asking the question, being respectful, having a quid pro quo that you're giving them something and in return for what you're getting. And I think people really enjoy that. And, you know, over the years, I have a number of friends who like to come up when I'm not here because I'm not here all the time. And they do something, you know, something similar in one way or another for me. And I get something out of it because, you know, they're watching over the house and the property when I'm not here. And so I actually have a parking spot that I've reserved for my friends in my driveway. So that whether I'm here or not, they have a place they can come by and park their car, go down and fish if I'm not around, or knock on the door and we go down and fish together. So, you know, we have a little community in that sense. Yeah. And then I have neighbors that we do, you know, similar kinds of things with.
Anything brief that you want to say about this question that we hear a lot about, like who owns a river bottom? Just briefly, because then we have to go on and hear our next speaker.
Well, I mean, I know for some people it's controversial, but, you know, when you take a look at the ownership patterns in the upper Beaverkill, you know, around Lou Beach, where the public simply can't go in, you talk about, you know, Cooks Falls or, you know, in the lower Beaverkill or, you know, some of the other areas in the lower Beaverkill that are just, you know, people have basically very effectively, made those private waters. And so there is the river bottom that is owned in our area by private owners, some of whom are very happy to have the public come by, some of whom, have issues. I know some people have some real issues, but I think, the fact is it's owned by private people where there isn't a public easement or public ownership of the property. And I think it's just a question of being respectful to people. And I think if anglers are respectful, and I know nobody here is disrespectful of owners on the river. Maybe you even know anybody who's disrespectful, but the problem is there's enough people out there. It'd be great if we could find some way to communicate with them how to respect other people and other people's interests.
All right, thank you so much, Glenn. Our last speaker, and again, people can post a question or comment, and we'll see if we have time at the end for a little discussion. Our last speaker is Nathan Doig, who is a DEC law enforcement personnel. And welcome, Nate. Are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe, a little bit about yourself, about your role and job, and what the river means to you.
Sure. My name's Nate Doig. I've been a conservation officer here in Delaware County since 2008. I've been on the job since 2004. I live in Walton, and the river is obviously a big part of the job. There's 4 conservation officers that cover Delaware County. Currently, we have 2 guys that are on their days off, and the 3rd guy is on the desk today covering calls. So that leaves 1 guy for all of Delaware County, roughly the size of Rhode Island.
Is that you today?
That's me. And
So what's happening out there now?
Exactly. That just leads me to my next topic of people need to call when there's complaints. When there's something that's a clear violation, you can't hesitate to call. We depend on the public to make these calls in a timely fashion. Quite often we'll get calls that are 2 or 3 days late. I saw such and such taking fish over the limit, and you get the call a couple days later. At that point, there's little to anything that can be done. One of the things I wanted to talk about too was we don't just do fish and wildlife enforcement. Whether it's solid waste enforcement, timber theft enforcement, air quality complaints, stream protection. The list for a New York State game warden goes on and on and on and on. And being cut as thin as we are, we don't have all the time that we'd like to push, river enforcement.
Yeah.
One of the things I also want to mention too is that there does seem to be a misconception that people are taking over their limit of fish all the time, and people are just taking more than they should, yada yada yada. In general, over the last 2 or 3 months, myself as a game warden here in Delaware County, the amount of complaints that have come in regards to poaching fish is very, 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 very few. And once again, I check a lot of people on the river. A lot of you are probably like, I've never seen this guy in green before in my life. However, I check a lot of people, and most people are very respectful, and most people have their licenses and are doing the right thing. But I just want to let the public know that I'm not really receiving many complaints in regards to poaching. Do we get one here and there? Yes. And we do our best to handle it in a timely fashion. But we get some of them, and some of them we don't.
Could you tell us just briefly in terms of like along the river, like what are you responsible for and what are you not responsible for, just so everyone knows?
Okay, so we're definitely as far as all your New York State fishing regulations, but another thing we do is stream protection. Whether somebody's digging on the banks of a stream, you're building a dock out into the stream. That's huge as far as people that are going down the river in boats and kayaks to, hey, give us a call. Do they have a permit for that? It looks like they're working outside of a permit. Because obviously there's a lot of remote areas where I'm not getting to on a day-to-day basis, or I can't see it from the road. So, it's once again, how much we rely on the public for information is crucial here. Back to what everybody else has said too. The amount of traffic on the river since COVID has gone through the roof. Whether it's the lower west branch or the upper west branch or east branch and so on, the number of people, whether they're fishing or kayaking or guiding, is gone up tremendously. And I clearly see that.
What do you think is the impact of that?
Yeah, as far as that, I'm not going to get into my position in regards to that.
Okay.
Land ownership is a topic that seems to be coming up more and more, as far as deeded right-of-ways and actually owning the bottom of the river. We've had it come up a few times in certain different areas. It's an enforcement nightmare for us, because it's not going to, I've yet to see a spot that is posted properly.
People post improperly, are you saying, or?
Well, it's tough to post when you got your deed states that you own to the middle of the river or 3/4 of the way to the other side of the river, properly posting one on each corner and, name and address and so on. However, if somebody does own the bottom of the river and they clearly know that the person is in that section of the river and they tell them to leave because they own river bottom rights, and then they refuse to, they have, the right to pursue the trespass.
And you were saying before the importance of people reaching out to you. Do you want to give your number, or do you not give out your number, or how do people reach you?
Okay, as far as contacting any of the Delaware County officers or in any, whether you're fishing up in the Salmon River or not, all our numbers are public numbers. We work out of our house. They're all going to be in the New York State Fishing Guidebook. So they're all in there. My number directly is 607-267-5452. Once again, 607-267-5452. Feel free to call anytime, and if I can, I'll help you out. If I don't know the answer, I'll find the answer for you. And if you got a question, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you so much, Nate. Maybe on that note, we'll actually turn to see what questions we have so we can hear a few of them and have a little bit of discussion before we close for the day. Molly, are you monitoring the chat? Or who is?
Indeed, I am.
All right, can you share a question?
Yes, let's see here. So the first question is for Matt. How do you feel that with year-round fishing season, do you think the fish will be affected by a no break for the fish scenario? Is Matt still on?
He might not be able to hear you. Let's see.
Oh, true.
Is there anyone else that wants to take a crack at that? Maybe we should go on to another question.
Okay.
We'll leave that one for everyone to ponder.
So there are a few comments. One of them says many rivers out west have a higher fish count and they have limited access for guides, and it should be considered on the upper Delaware, even limited personal boat traffic. So I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that.
Anyone have any brief thoughts they want to share?
Yeah, this is Glenn. I just think it's extremely difficult to make that happen. And as much as I think there's a need for it, I have a hard time seeing how you actually make it happen.
It also makes me think of what I think it was Matt that said, maybe we need regulatory solutions, but that's not the ideal. Like the ideal is how can we work this out among ourselves and not have to rely on regulation. So that it might be needed.
This is
sometime,
Sam.
Is that Sam?
This is Sam Decker, and I think if they can, yes, it is. And I think if they can do that in all the other states, there is no reason why it can't be done on the Delaware.
All right. Well, let's leave that question at that because we know that's a hot topic, and we got a voice from each side.
Okay. So a question for you, Clay. Are there any metrics or benchmarks you can reference that define what is too many people, too many boats, etc.?
Yes, an international standard is my opinion, so I'm ready to weigh in at any time. No, that's a great question. Obviously not. I mean, but I mean, I think we can sort of hear from some of the stories, like what the impacts are, the negative impacts are. And so maybe that's a way of looking at it. Like, are the negative impacts getting too big for us not to do something, or they're not so big and it's fine? And certainly there's debate around that. But this doesn't seem to me like a super, like scientifically, you can study it and then say these are the scientific answers.
Mhm.
That's my opinion as your humble moderator.
And then the last thing is, who is this? Fred Peckham put some info in here about different deeds in the Hardenberg patent in Delaware County.
Nice, good.
So that's it though for the chat box.
Good. Any other questions or any other thoughts on answers to any of those questions that we just heard?
I've got,
How do you know if it's too overcrowded? Mike?
okay, well, so I've just, it's more of a general, but it kind of goes, well, I'll just say this, an action item may be coming out of some of the work, and I'm assuming, you know, Jeff or FUDR, you know, Dan, whoever you guys, this baby planned, but I find this useful to be, I thank you for letting me be part of this, and I'll help try to disseminate some of the importance of this in my chattering with people. But I think that would be somehow useful, and whether there were some kind of a communications campaign, whether it be flyers, whether it be, I don't know what it would be. You guys can figure that out or help me, and I'll participate. But educating people on all of these issues, the idea that the one lady, Jessica was talking about kayaking and going in front or behind, or being courteous. Some of that courtesy, some of that respect. Glenn was talking about meeting some very nice people on the river. And so the respecting people's properties. Some of it is just educating these tourists that we may see and will see more of. Some people that are using the river for the first time, people that come up from downstate and say, hey, I think I'm going to be a fly fisherman today. They don't really know what they're doing, maybe, or they're going to be a kayaker or a boater, and they're not aware of what the river means to other constituents, and they're not aware of how to handle when they have an intersection with them and a wader in the river. And there may be a way to create content that could help educate them and solve some of this, or help maintain a level of civility and going forward. Anyway, I realize maybe the regulatory issue may be the way to do it, but I don't know how to enforce it either. But even then, I think that's the lowest level of society that I would want to be part of, where everything has to be regulated and dictated. I think I'd like to believe that we're capable of carrots rather than sticks, and responding to carrots rather than sticks as a community. So
Very well said, Mike. I think we'll begin to wrap it up based on
Just
your
really quick.
comments.
Can I
Jim, yeah, briefly?
comments? The effect of year-round fishing on the fishery, it was probably on the order of 25 years ago that when the no-kill stretch was established up in Deposit area, that 2-mile stretch, that was open year-round. And I don't think that there was really any noticeable effect. There wasn't a lot of pressure. Now, because pressure has increased overall, does that mean that there'll be more pressure in the winter? I think it's just something that needs to be monitored, but I would suspect that it's not going to really have any any negative effect on the fishery itself. And overcrowding, I think that guides sometimes get more criticism than they deserve, in that when people say it's overcrowded, there's so many guides. Pretty sure that the DEC study, the study showed that about 15% of the fishing traffic is guided fishing. And so there's 85% of fishing traffic, which is non-guides, And then that doesn't include, of course, the recreational kayakers and canoers too. So,
Yeah.
So I don't, whenever you say there's too many guides on the river, well, it's although it's a significant amount, it's not a huge amount of the total boat traffic on the rivers.
Good. Thank you, Jim, for the historical example of that deposit no-kill and also the number, some numbers on the traffic.
Yeah, sure.
So I think we are about out of time.
Hi, Clay, Peter here.
Yes,
I just
Peter, briefly.
observe, there's another player who could be part of this conversation if we do this again, and that's the National Park Service. It's a very, very big part of the thing. And I have an overriding concern that I put in a little post that we've got lots and lots of river miles, and we've got very limited access, actually. You consider the loss of Long Eddy and what that has done to access on the main stem. And then the fact that we have this anomaly of on the East Branch, this concept of private ownership, and you can't anchor your boat, and you have the West Branch and you anchor your boat. It just doesn't really make sense. The fish are the people of New York State, and we got these curious set of very limiting rules. If you are, as I am, I call myself an outsider angler. I'm not a guide, I'm not a boat owner, I'm interested, but I'm an outsider.
Thank you for that, Peter. Is there anyone else that wants to share anything before we wrap up? It's really useful hearing from people. All right. Well, I would like to share briefly some of what I heard from our panel. One thing that I heard was the deep connection that people have to the river, whether that's like from somebody who, in one of our different groups, a businessman, angler, a kayaker, a landowner, all really having the same kind of appreciation for the peace and beauty of the river. And also, being an angler myself, I know that's a big part of like fly fishing literature, right? Is about that more than about like catching a fish, like about that connection that it brings to nature. So that was one big similarity that I heard across all of the speakers. The other thing that I felt just kept coming up again and again is the relational aspect of it. Like that as we interact with each other on the river, we can do it in different ways. We can do it in a way that's like, this person is my opponent. They're like trying to get in my space or whatever it is, whichever side you're on, or it can be like a more relational approach. And Glenn's example of the bottle of wine and the farmer was like a nice distillation of that. And also Jess's description of how she interacts with the anglers on the river. So that just seems like to me, sort of an important takeaway. And I think that was part of the purpose of why we wanted to do this, is just to hear people from a different perspective than ours and start to sort of open our thinking about like how we relate to each other as a foundation for trying to move ahead. And I think FUDR has, people like Jeff said at the beginning, people are calling him up and saying, what are we going to do about this? What are you going to do? And there have been a lot of discussions, and it hasn't really been clear if like, is this the role of FUDR? Maybe it is. Maybe this is a good place for it to step in, or maybe it's not. So I think the organization is still in a conversation about that. And we're really grateful for what everyone shared today. And if you have other suggestions or recommendations or thoughts, please let us know. I think that FUDR is really open to what people think and ideas of what could happen. So I think that's just about it. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you. I don't know if there's anything you want to say to close out this conversation or next steps or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, this was really interesting. I think, I hope it was illuminating for folks to see the kinds of conversations we wrestle with every day, and people have different opinions, strong opinions, and often very diametrically opposed opinions. One thing that we have, I think, agreed upon at FUDR is that public education is always a good thing. I think most people would agree with that. We have been somewhat laboring over a one-pager that we right now refer to as river etiquette. It has been incredibly challenging to write it because of this very conversation and some of the stuff that we've heard today. The other challenge, and Nate, you're the only DEC guy on at the moment. Yeah, unfortunately, your colleagues had to drop off from earlier sessions. It's more their area than yours. But, when we start putting out guidance and our opinions on behavior on the river, the regulatory agencies take a look, right? So we've had not just DEC, but also National Park and Pennsylvania. They get a little nervous that we're, interpreting law or, wandering into a regulatory arena that we don't intend to. So the review by those agencies of that sheet has been rigorous, and it's taken us a while to get this together. So we're very close to it. I think the timing's good. We're now at sort of at the end. I was going to say we're at the end of the recreational season, but since we now have fishing year round, I guess I can't exactly say that. But I think folks know what I mean, and we hope to have that thing ready. So I think at a minimum, we'll go prime time with that, and that's one small step in a much larger challenge. So that's going to happen here.
And Jeff, can I say just one other thing? One other very important thing that I forgot to say is a really huge thanks to all of our panelists for sharing their experiences. Thanks to Nate and Glenn and Jess and Mike and Matt. It was great having you on with us.
And thanks to you, Clay. Nice job, man. That's not an easy thing to do. So hopefully everyone got something out of today, and we'll turn you loose now and hope to see all of you on Thursday for day 2. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.